Hello, my name is Jan Urschel. I'm a concept designer working in the video game and movie industry with clients such as Marvel, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Microsoft, and many more. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about sketching 3D environments in Blender. We're going to use a variety of new tools like the Bezier curve and voxel remeshers to create man-made and natural objects, trying to combine them with kitbash assets and also taking a look at how we can change those kitbash assets into something more interesting rather than the stock models. So let's get started. Just a quick overview over what we're going to use in this video in terms of software, in terms of tools. So of course we're going to look at Blender again. We're going to use that predominantly. If you should download the latest Blender build from builder.blender.org/download. I'm not using the latest stable, which is 2.83.3 LTS. I'm using the 2.9 beta at this point. And it has been very stable for me, so I'd recommend you guys use that so you have exactly the same tools that I'm using at exactly the same stage. I'm also using, of course, the Quixel bridge, where I'm going to drop in some kitbash tools that I'm going to be using and changing a little bit. You don't need exactly Quixel. I'm not using anything proprietary to them. You can use any other kind of assets that you want to use, trees, rocks, whatever, if you want to follow along with this tutorial exactly. So nothing specific here, don't worry about that. It's just wanted to let you know what I'm using. I'm also using what is called a scatter. They just released the third release of their tool. It's one of the best and the easiest tool for scattering trees, organic material, grass, and whatever not. It's very, very cool and very fast. So you should definitely check that out. And then, of course, I'm using, as usual, PureRef, a reference organization tool, which I'm going to get to in a second. And for images from movies, for good reference, lighting and cinematic shot reference, I'm using shotdeck.com. So I have a little video on that on my YouTube. You can check that out. And we're going to start with looking at our reference. So here we are in PureRef, and of course, as usual, we start our project by collecting reference images. It's very easy. You just open PureRef and you just drag and drop some images in, and then you can right-click image and you can arrange them, align them, normalize them. Normalizing basically means you have them all in a roughly equal size for easier viewing. I usually select these and you can move them around. Left click is for selection, middle click is for panning, right click is for moving the window. And then let's have a quick look at zooming in here. So I have a variety of references and I have them in separate areas. So I wanted to do kind of like something built out of wood, kind of like a shack or like a dock made out of like very ramshackle pieces of wood, old and abused and weathered. And I wanted to see how can I do this in Blender so that it looks organic. It doesn't look too stiff. It doesn't look too 3D. And how can I do this quickly and in an interesting way? So if you look a little bit at the reference, you can see that it's like all over the place. It's not everything is straight. There are some basic shapes behind it, but we need to, of course, like there are some cubes and whatnot, and very, very simple structures, and like a triangular shape on top of here. But how can I do that? How can I get this organic look with like lots of holes and it's like at an angle here. And so this was the initial kind of reference that I collected because I wanted to do this kind of like dock image. This kind of technique I think also can work for any kind of brick building that is not too straight. It's of course not going to work for like really clean hard surface kind of stuff, but I think these kind of objects can work really well. So this is the general reference for the design and for the idea, and then of course I have reference for the overall mood I want to achieve. So I looked on ShotDeck for some stuff from just Roger Deakins kind of images, and also from some other movies. I think this is Gangs of New York, this is Children of Men, a lot of stuff from Skyfall here, just for the general mood and color grading that these guys applied here, and for the general distribution of dark to white and the kind of mood that these guys achieve. And then also down here I have some further reference for details. So I wanted to look at what kind of materials these kind of stilts have. The wood, you can see how it is like even like disintegrating here. It's becoming really thin and thinned out and broken up. And you can see kind of the texture and the quality of the top and how weathered it really is. Then I wanted to look at a bit of the transition area from water into the land to have some interesting visuals guiding me through that. So you can see there's a variety, right? There's some close-ups, there's some wider shots. I'm not sure this the lighting in these, of course, is not at all aligned with the kind of mood I want to create, but it's more about the quality, the distribution of the rocks, and all these sort of things, and very, very particular about these kind of sediments and all the kind of stuff here, and the color change, where the water usually reaches up during the tides, and that's going to be very important, I think, if you want to do some close-ups. So yeah, your reference board will probably look a bit different, but I encourage you all to use this really cool tool. Let's come to the first exercise. Choose a general topic that you want to tackle with this. Collect and organize your reference for mood, cinematic style, overall structure and idea, and also the detailed treatment. Okay, let's get started. Here we are in Blender. And before we can really start sketching, we need to set up a few things. So very simple, but nevertheless, it will make sketching so much easier. So first of all, I have a character in here. I also have HDRI set up, just so I have roughly like the kind of mood I want. I have also a light in here. Maybe I should kind of match that. It's not really that necessary right now. It's not the most important thing to do, as it's quite overcast and we probably want to have a very faint shadow. In any case, so before we start sketching, we need to do a few things. So the way we're going to sketch is basically using the Bezier curve tool, not the curve really necessarily itself, but what it allows us to do. So we're gonna add a new one with Shift A, go into Tab, select all if it's not already selected, X, delete vertices. And then, as you know, we can go here to Tool. If you don't have this, you need to press N, and then we click on this icon here that says Draw, and then we can draw. But before we do anything, we need to make sure that depth is set to surface, and then we can draw, and you can see that it draws on this surface, or it can also draw on this surface. So if I hit tab again, you see there's really nothing there. You can see a faint line if it's selected. If it's deselected, you can see that. But we also have some adjustments here that we can make in the object data properties. We want to go expand the geometry part, and then here we have bevel and depth. If it's closed, then just open it by clicking on it. And if you slide it, you can see how it creates kind of like a tube, and you can influence the diameter of the tube. You can change the resolution and everything. You can also say fill caps. Oh, you don't. You can only do that when we load in a profile, which we will do in a second. So this is great for cables and all sorts of things. You have this, you can hit tab, and then with your gizmo, you can move it around, which is great. You can also, with S, scale it to influence these handles. Or you can only influence one handle by clicking on it and moving it around. So you can do all sorts of things. But what we can also do is that we can, in the bevel, load in an object. And this will become particularly useful because we want to use this and actually make, let's say we want to make a barn and we want to make all these rows and rows and layers of wooden planks. And for example, if we're here on the painting tool, you can imagine that if I make lots of these, it kind of becomes like that. The only problem is that they're all just round tubes. But now we can make a new, let's say we make a plane. We shrink it down a bit. So basically what we need to do now is make a, we will make a profile for our wooden plank. So just if you think about the plank, if you think about taking this and extruding it, I mean, I can just, for example, extrude it right now. Then that kind of gives you like a wooden plank, right? But we can have this extrusion driven by the curve, by assigning a profile to the curve. And we can generate that profile out of this piece here. I'll make a copy because I want to do another one just in a second to show you. Reset location and scale with Control A, and then you will see it's disappearing almost. Let's make a different material for these. Add new material. We call it wood. And now we have created a new material. I will make this a bit darker just for now so that we can see what's going on. By the way, if you don't have the material utilities enabled, you go to Preferences, Add-ons, Material Utilities, and enable that. With that, you can select multiple objects, click Shift Q, and then you have these little menu that allows you to add multiple objects. Sorry, add multiple materials to multiple objects, something which you otherwise can't do. So let's make a profile out of that. And we simply do that by selecting it, hitting Object, and saying Convert to Curve from Mesh. And now it's actually a curve. So you can hit that and you can see it's like a rectangular curve, which is great. So if I have that, I actually want to get rid of that. Actually, not of this part. Try to select this, hit X and delete that. And then I can choose to have an object here. I can use the color picker and it will highlight and give me the name of this object, or this This is not a curve yet, so I can only load in curved objects. I can't load in a polygon. And now you see that I have changed the profile of my Bezier curve. So now I can say fill caps, so it makes this just like a solid object. It looks like a solid object, but now there's something wrong. The orientation is not really right. So you can see that when you change the rotation and you hit Control A and reset rotation and scale, it will apply this, and now everything is exactly applied to the cube, just like the wooden planks would be. It's a bit big, so you can make it smaller. And now we have these nice, like, overlapping, quite random looking planks, which allows us to continue here and add lots of little bits and pieces. You see, sometimes it creates these kind of things. And you need to be a bit careful that you're always kind of looking straight on to the object and there's not anything blocking the way. So if it's like this and you're like drawing on top, then it will suddenly draw also on top of the lady here. So you need to make sure that you have an unblocked view to whatever you have. Now we have made kind of like a cube. If you give this a wooden material, you will see that this will become just like a wooden crate. Now there's a couple of things that will allow us to work a bit more nicely, and that is, for example, now that I can move this away, you can make something a bit taller. Kind of, let's make it big enough so that the lady could go inside. We can make a door. Again, let's not have anything in front. So I can continue sketching with this, but it's kind of weird that I always have this cube here. So we can also do something like add this and make it transparent. So if I go into the settings here, blend mode, alpha blend, and change the alpha to 0, the object has disappeared. So of course I don't know where it is exactly right now, but this could help you make it look like actually you're painting in the air. And it helps kind of create the illusion that you're sketching, and maybe this can help you be a bit more creative. If you don't like it, of course, you can just have it like a little bit there so that it helps you kind of as a guide to see exactly where the boundaries are of this. Now you can continue sketching like that, or you can also press Tab, deselect everything with Alt A, press B for the selection tool, and you can get all these, and then you can still manipulate them. So if you don't like that, you can change it like that. You can also make something like, let's say we want to make a door. So we have to kind of keep in mind how big our character is, and we can sketch in the other direction. So you can pretty quickly. So I've chosen this old shipwreck hull, exported it, and we'll select it here. Where do I have it? I haven't exported it actually. That is good. So I'll hit export, exported successfully. And now I have this old shipwreck here. And now I have, it looks a bit milky in the background because I have this cube here. And now I have this pretty cool looking old shipwreck hull here. Now there's another thing which I can do, which can be useful. Because I mentioned before, we're going to have the Bezier curve and we're also going to have the voxel remesher. The voxel remesher can sometimes help and sometimes not. It depends on the kind of look you want to go for and also how close you are. You will see what I mean in a second. So we have this little box here and we can still change this in order to give it a box projection, but for now that is not necessary because it looks actually quite good like this. So now we're going to add a modifier. You see that a reduced amount of modifiers is available for the curves. So let's say mesh, and it's already adding the new voxel remesher automatically onto it. And you need to keep in mind that this is 2.9 beta. So you should use this one as well if you want to follow along like I do. Let me just quickly save this out. So now that I've saved it, let's have a look at this. Here with the voxel size, you can kind of influence the precision with which this is being remeshed. So 0.1 is not very accurate. Nevertheless, it gives really interesting results. So let's move it down a little bit, and you have to be very, very careful because if you make this too small, this number, your computer will go crazy because there's so much precision involved in retracing it that it will become really, really difficult for the computer to calculate it. So be careful and don't just mash the slider all the way to the left. So you can see how if I decrease the voxel size, how the tracing, the remeshing of these objects will become more and more precise, and it will resemble more and more the kind of original piece. And now I think I do need to add the right kind of projection and mapping. So I can just do this like this. This is the kind of thing you need to redo again and again. The usual texture coordinate object into vector transform, into vector texture, and make this to box. And you need to do that again and again. And again, kind of with every texture you're importing from somewhere else, especially Quixel. So there's unfortunately no way around it. Maybe there is. Maybe I haven't found that yet. Maybe somebody can let me know if there is a faster way to do this. I have to bring this out, otherwise I can't see the connection. Okay, and now we can probably have to increase the size a bit more. With the remeshing, it kind of loses all its coordinates and everything. Here it looks quite nice. You have to enlarge it so it kind of makes sense with, again, you look at our character here and you think about how big these wooden planks are supposed to be, and that's how big you make it. So look at your reference and check exactly how big it's supposed to be. So this one is pretty So if you look at the before and after, you can kind of see that you're losing some of the holes, but you're kind of gaining a bit of cohesion, a bit of structure. So this can be a good way of achieving this kind of look. You can always check with and without. In this case, the without actually looks pretty good, but this can be a good example of getting used to this kind of workflow. Now, we can do a lot of other things with this as well. So as I mentioned before, we have this kind of profile here, another one I made. So with this one, we can also make some changes to it beforehand. So let me select all the 4 vertices in vertex mode, and then hit Ctrl-Shift-B and make kind of like a round profile. And then I can say again, object, convert to curve from mesh. So now I have another profile made. And of course I can just go here and change this to plane 2. Gonna take a second, and now we have this really chunky thing. Now if you change, this looks like a stone well kind of thing, which would be pretty cool. So you can make you can probably design a stone well. You just need to make a round, let's say a cylinder. It's a bit big for a well. Somebody's gonna fall in. You do it like this, and then you can, for the ease of use, we just copy that over. Change this profile back to number 1. And then we have this one. Hit A in edit mode, get rid of everything, and then we can start redrawing. Careful to not draw further than that here. Not the prettiest. You see there's some areas here which you probably want to get rid of. So we can just maybe take this one, get rid of this one. Was this one? Yeah. It's kind of like the end piece here, as you see. Okay, that's fine. So we get rid of the cylinder, and now we can change the texture. Let's see what we have. Instead of wood, we're looking for stone. Let's see if I have anything in my local library here. This one looks pretty cool. Stone wall export. Let me quickly get rid of the, let's see if we get rid of the remesher. Probably want to have to change the scale here. It looks a bit messy, but you see if I would apply the same kind of setup, bear with me for 1 second. I can say node copy, node paste. And then I could, for example, change this here. Now it looks a lot better. It looks more like stone. I can change this, and you can spend some time on it to really refine this. but basically you would be able to get a really natural looking kind of, okay, not really like crazy realistic, but I think for concepting purposes and as a general starting point, I think this is pretty damn good. And then you can also convert this just to a, you can convert this to a mesh again and start sculpting or changing the polygons and do more to that in a different kind of workflow. But that's kind of what you can do as well. And furthermore, you can also, if you just continue copy and pasting this, because when you start from scratch, you have to do it again and again. But what we can also do is take this, edit mode, select all with A, get rid of all the vertices, go in our draw tool again. And what we can do is start sketching in a more natural, random way, and maybe choose a different texture again. For simplicity's sake, I'm going back to Quixel here and try to find a material that is more like a stone. I'll just choose this one for now. It's exported. I click on this one here. And I really need to do it again. But I'm just going to connect the first one for now, just to show you. And then I'll reconnect everything properly later. And the tracing of the object is a bit too exact for what I want to do. So if I make it a bit more rough, it becomes a bit smoother. And also if I increase the size of this and maybe choose a better texture, then I can kind of make something that could look like kind of like rocks here and there. Now, this might be, depending on your case, solved with like a scattering function to make a separate rock and then scatter it everywhere. But sometimes it needs a bit more art direction. It needs a bit more careful placing of certain types of rocks in certain locations for composition, for design, and other reasons. So that's how you can place, for example, bigger and smaller rocks and piles of rocks and other things together. So with the same technique, as you can see here, we can arrive at a variety of different looking structures. And we can combine that, of course, with other stuff like different kind of structures that we can use the Bezier curve in a different way. So, for example, let's try to make a prototype of our dock. So for the dock, we can use a tiny bit of a different technique. Instead of using the surface mode, we can use something slightly different. So let's add, for this one, I'm just going to add a new, actually we can use the same one here, but otherwise you might be able to see better what we're building here. So I'll turn the voxel off for now, the voxel remesher, and I also want to change this back from the object, from the profile, and then get rid of all these points again, and I want to start drawing again. But instead of like using it like this here, the tool settings, I want to say only first and plain normal view. So now what I can do is I can draw straight up a line and center the camera on this, and it will start drawing from the surface normal upwards. So in the direction the normal faces, in this case the normal faces up, I will be able to draw a line up like this. So I can make it a bit random. I can try to draw these like this. It's not going all over the place, which is fine. But basically you can continue like this. You can, if you can kind of pay a little bit attention of where they're standing, you can draw them in a straight line, or more or less straight line. So this allows me to be able to kind of draw the structure for my dock in a nice random kind of way. Now of course these are all kind of all over the place, but to a certain extent these these stilts are kind of all over the place. Now we can do other things like make adjustments later. We don't need to draw everything. We do not need to really draw everything. We can also, excuse me, I forgot to press B for the selection. We can also do things like if you press S, X and then 0, you can kind of get these all to be on the same line, and then we can like play with these values here a bit to get them a bit more organized, but still kind of random enough. So we want to have, we'll collect all of these guys and then just kind of bring them a bit in line, because I'm only changing the location of these control points. I'm not changing the thickness of these themselves. So now I have these guys here, and probably should make them a little bit larger compared to my person here. That's why it's always important to have this character here. And you can continue drawing these, right? So you can choose to continue sketching these. You can select a few other ones. Just complete the selection with Control L. You can move them over here just to kind of have them nicely aligned here. And then we have these guys, and we want to probably make them a bit larger. They need to have a bit more thickness in order to be more proper. So we can do stuff like that. You can also make them in a different way, just like we did before. You take this guy and you make a kind of, you just emulate the shape of what the dock looks like this, and then we also want to make a top for that. So you have that, and then we go in here again. We say, go to our draw tool, we say surface, and we get rid of the only first, and then we can kind of draw like this, and then you can continue to flesh out your dock. And it doesn't, I think I'm not too worried about these kind of mistakes here, because they could kind of end up being nice happy accidents later on. So we have that, and we of course also need kind of a structure here on top. We can do that in a second. So you have these guys, and yeah, let's actually finish up the scene like that. And excuse me, let's finish the dock like that. So you'll see that we can kind of like add something like that. You can add some streaks here. I'm building only like a sample of what this dock would look like. You can definitely go deeper into that and detail it out more. But you see, if we create something like this here, if you draw on top, it wouldn't follow the normal in that sense. So we can kind of use that to create like a structure, kind of like a substructure for these guys, which is also cool. So we can do that. Create these one after another. A bit wobbly. So that's cool. But so that will serve us for this. But if you want to change the orientation of the wood here, we have to actually assign it to a different profile. So we can copy and paste this again, move it up a little bit. Let's just get rid of these for now. And if we start drawing again, you will see that, of course, it's still the same. So we have this piece here, which is not nice. But we can actually take our profile that we have here, copy paste it, duplicate it with Shift D. Now it's plane number 3. If we go this to this and go here and select plane number 3 and actually change it, then it will have an effect. So if we rotate it like this, let's say 90 degrees, and update the rotation and scale, you will see this has flipped. And maybe we want to also increase this in size a bit, so we have like a walkway that we kind of can build here out of these wooden planks. So we can continue drawing here. Don't worry if they're intersecting with these. We can still paint them. We can still lift it up. We can still paint it out. So don't worry about that too much. Okay, I made some mistakes here, of course, but that's okay. Deselect everything. Get rid of these, and then you can move it up a little bit so it looks a bit better. And you can make these like thicker. You can change the profile again. You can make it you can change the profile again, and then it becomes a bit thicker and a bit more sturdy. You can also take these guys and just Shift D, duplicate them. Maybe just rotate them 180 degrees so it looks a bit more random. We want to get rid of these, and then you can change the diameter a bit. so that it looks like it is actually a more complex looking structure than it really is. So you can see you can get there pretty quickly, and then we can we haven't even activated our remesher, so we can turn that on, and now you see it disappearing. It's just because the voxel size is not really it doesn't really fit the scale of everything. So you need to always make sure to hit rotation and scale for everything for the remesher to be applied properly. So let's see how we can influence our voxel size in order for these guys to show up properly. So in this case, actually increasing the voxel size has a better effect instead of decreasing. You can kind of see how sometimes here it starts blending together if two items are too close to each other. So there is no right or wrong here. There's no magic number that you need to follow. There is only what looks good to you. So we can do the same here. We increase the voxel size. And don't worry about all these like things where they don't reach the ground or anything. This is gonna be integrated, of course, into like a different kind of surface. So don't worry about that too much. But we have also the top here, which we can. Oh, it's already voxelized. Okay, maybe it's a bit too precise. Yeah. So if we change it up a little bit, then we get something more organic looking. Of course, there's like lots of bits and pieces that are not beautiful, but if you look at it like this, it depends on if it's like a hero element or if it's just like this in the background. That will make a big difference, right? So if it's closer, if the person is standing on it and you need like a really good looking detailed kind of thing, then you need to change some of the settings, make it more precise. This is one bumpy dock, but anyway. Also, you'll see here that the orientation of the wood doesn't really make sense for this design here. So we probably want to flip that around, but be careful. This texture is also assigned to this shack here, and if you want to preserve that, we need to make basically a copy of this texture. So that is very easy. You select the texture, the object with the texture that you want to change. You click on that little number here, and it will create a copy. You see 0.001. That is for now applied only to this. And then we can play with the rotation of these planks, and we want to change the X rotation to 90 in this case, and we want to do the same here. We want to assign this to the other one, and you see that we have what looks like actually a quite nicely randomized texture here and there. Now, will this hold up to like extreme scrutiny? Probably not, but it might just be good enough for concepting, for sketching, for getting just the general shape and everything down. And then depending on your needs, you can refine it in Photoshop, you can refine it in 3D even by changing it into a proper mesh and sculpting it. But this is about sketching, this is about getting the idea out, this is about finding these structures and making them look cool really quickly. And honestly, like for most of what I do, this is more than good enough, I'd say. And you can dress it up in all sorts of ways. you can add details, you can add props, you can, I don't know, add a ladder, fishing nets, and all sorts of stuff. But I mean, in terms of like a natural looking kind of piece, this is done in a matter of minutes, and you can build like incredibly complex kind of big structures out of it, and you can always like you see here, like I've made a few of these, and then I just duplicated and rotated them around. The ability to go in and change the control points and like do something completely crazy here, and that paired with the voxel remesher allows you an incredible amount of flexibility, because the geometry here is partially generated and not always sculpted or committed to. So there's a fair amount of procedural technology in there through the modifiers that allows you to change things on the fly and work in a non-destructive way, basically through the curve and remesh modifier combination, which makes this really, really powerful. I mean, that's what I mean here. It doesn't hold up necessarily to all the scrutiny, but you see how the pattern here kind of repeats. But I mean, that's kind of what it is. You can paint that out, right? But in terms of even in daylight, I would say this holds up very, very well. Usually you can kind of see when everything is foggy, and I mean, I'll probably end up with quite a foggy, heavy, moody scene. But if you look at it like this, like even in daylight, this does not look too bad. There's enough like bits and pieces and like weird kind of randomized things that kind of started maybe out as accidents, but that with a trained eye can be used as a lot of happy accidents as well. So we've built this now, and I think now it's time to combine all these elements into a scene. For the second exercise, you should sketch out the main parts of your environment, moving from the larger pieces to the smaller details with the tools I showed you. Make sure to have a character for scale in your scene right from the beginning, and add also the basic materials or even more refined materials and lights into your scene, so that it makes working in Eevee and in real time more comfortable, and you'll be actually able to see what effects your sketching and your buildings have in a more final looking scene, and where you need to add details and such. In this part, we're going to try to combine all these elements with some of the more traditional pieces of traditional ways of modeling that we know, because the power, of course, of this does not lie in the piece itself, in the technique itself, but in how you combine it with other things you know, and how you can leverage this approach to make your images look better. So there's a couple of things that we want to do here. So I have I'm going to show you some of the building blocks, and then in the end we're going to go over the scene I built previously. So this is going to be about adding all these other pieces, and we want to start with a bit of water, and I want to subdivide this a little bit. So we want to have a water plane, we want to have a plane for kind of the shoreline that I'm just going to quickly build myself, because that works fairly quickly, and And we have a principled shader here. I'll make this a bit bigger so you can see what's going on. I'll make the color black. The roughness is going to be very rough. And now basically we want to add some water ripples with a bump map to it. I'll reset the rotation and scale with Control A as usual, and I'll add a noise texture in here. Factor into the height, and already something's happening. This looks more like oil slick, but we're gonna fix that. We need some coordinates to help us influence the size a bit better. I'm gonna actually make a bit of space because I kind of want to control this a bit better. So I'm going to have a bit less of strength. And I'm going to increase the scale a lot. Like really a lot. To something like, yeah, like this. And also maybe up the detail a bit. And now I want to, because it looks too even though it's noise, it looks a bit too even. I want to add another one. And I'll add this here. It's a mix RGB node, so I can kind of combine these two noises, but I want the second noise to be a lot how do I say? My cursor disappeared. That's great. I want the second one to be a lot, the second node to be a lot calmer. And I can influence how I want this mix to happen with the factor here. So you can see that this will favor the first. And if I slide it to the right, this will favor the second input here. And I need to find a nice mixture between having smaller ripples and bigger ripples. You can also use like, I don't know, like a Musgrave texture, all sorts of other things. And maybe I also want to add like an image texture that has a bit of a water feeling to it. Let me add that quickly. It's kind of like a top-down image with a bit of water. We also want to, this is a bit big, but I'm going to add my usual node setup. Like we have done it so many times before. Make sure this is connected from object to vector. I'll change this point to texture and have this mode to box. And now we can play around with this a bit and put it in the roughness as well. A bit of, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Maybe I think I want to have a color ramp in here just to get rid of some of the, it's like turquoise values. Now this makes it immediately black and white, kind of what I want. We can blend it together a bit. You can kind of, if you can see it here, very faint, these lines that are for the tiling of the image texture, because it's not a proper image texture. It's just, sorry, not a proper texture that's tileable, but just a photo. So I can play around with that a little bit. So now we have like these kind of nice ripples. We can also, what we can try to do is take a noise texture. Okay. No, I don't want to do that. That makes no sense. I want to use this as kind of like a, where could we put it? Into the rotation. Which creates some funkiness, but if we take out a lot of the scale and play around a bit with the detail, then we get more nicer, like randomized, kind of randomized looking waves that don't look like it's just one image texture repeated again and again. So we have our water plane, and then we also want to have like a plane for the rocks. So let me see. We of course need a different kind of texture. Let's see what we have in terms of surfaces that would be really good. I think this one is pretty good. Stony soil. Let's use that one. Again, for speed purposes, I'm gonna use this one here. We have to change, of course, the... How do I still have it in my... Yes, I still have it here. I need to change the scaling and everything connected to that. I'll probably want to change also the color a bit, but this has to kind of go in tandem with some of the other changes that I have to make in terms of... Now you can do this anyway, but I'm just saying that it has to do with some of the changes I want to make in terms of the overall look of the environment with the mood. And you can see I kind of want to create a bit of a terrain here. And you can do that with sculpting. You can do that with moving vertices. You can do that any which way. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. It's just however you can create your environment is totally fine. I'm going to scale this up a little bit. And let's say we want to create a bit of a mood here. What I would usually do is like turn down the environment settings here a bit to make it a bit darker. You can also have like a hue saturation kind of slider in here and make it a bit more desaturated to have this a bit more depressing mood. Again, I haven't fully connected this into the nodes with all the other maps, so the reflectivity and everything is a bit thrown off. But for example, we do not have to just accept that these are the textures we're getting from Quixel, but we can also change it in terms of, again, we can add like a hue saturation in here and can play with the values and the darkness, the saturation and everything. So we can again like maybe add a bit of randomized kind of if we add like the randomizer and the proportional editing, we can get like surface unevenness with just like moving it up or down and changing the influence of the radius here. So it just looks a bit nicer. So of course this one is standing like, why would this hut stand in the middle of the water? That is a good question. Again, it's only an example here. I'm going to show you the full scene in a short while. But this at least makes sense here. Now what we can very easily do is that, I mean, I don't want to like keep on painting and painting or sketching and sketching. If I have a good piece of my dock, why can't I just duplicate it? Because honestly, it doesn't really look that copied if I add that here. And now we have this kind of scene here. We can like, she's not going to walk on water, so we can lift the water plane up a little bit. I don't know why there would be a well here, but you know, we chose a little well as our example here, so that's where it stands. We have the little hut, which kind of looks like a little bit like a toilet, and we have the scene here. We want to probably add like a nice fog volume, so we can add one. You can import a VDB file that you have, or use the fog from the regular settings. So I'll quickly add a fog. Let me just choose one that I purchased. Now we have like a little bit of a fog volume here. Let me have it here, and then I can increase it and make it into like a creepy kind of fog. It's a bit too, it looks already quite nice, but it's a bit too thick in parts. I also want to have a material, so we just click new and we get the principal volume right away. Volumes are only supported in 2.83 and beyond, so keep that in mind. It's a bit too, that's like, looks like a poisonous cloud, but just a little bit of a tint might not be bad. Maybe it's still too much. You have to be really careful. Even a small tint gives it quite a strong color. So now we have like a bit of a volume here. The volumes I would always recommend, honestly, to go to cycles, because the volumetrics look a lot better in cycles. So if we want to, let me see if I can do something else with the lighting. The sun is maybe a bit strong. I don't know. Let's see. It becomes quite dark now. We can also add to this a little bit of an emission. If I go to the object properties, this is a tiny bit that kind of lets it gel better with the overall atmosphere. So maybe this one. Let's just try what happens. Turn off the sun. What happens? Okay, now it becomes really moody. Oops. Now the sky is a bit out of whack. I mean, it could also that maybe a different HDR would serve better, but I just included this one for now. You can play around with these values, of course. So maybe a bit more of a emission here, maybe a tint, slight color tint into something more greenish or even bluish. You can also do stuff like go into the volumetrics settings of Eevee and change the start and end. So you can see that would start later. Also how far it reaches can have an effect on the overall look, even if it's slight. So you can see how you can create quite a moody scene overall. And again, there's no right or wrong settings. This one makes it a bit brighter. It all depends on how you can create exactly the mood you're looking for. And also, if we want to have a look at how it looks in cycles, we can do that. So, as I mentioned, the volumetrics will look a lot better in cycles. Sorry, it's a bit on the slow side here on my Mac, but you can see how the fog is a lot denser, a lot more interesting. It feels more tangible in a sense, whereas the one in Eevee still feels a bit like it feels a bit simple, but I think it kind of the mixture of it really helps us to understand how we can work in real time and then switch over to cycles in order to get a more pleasing overall result. So this one looks actually pretty good. So I usually work in Eevee and then render it out in cycles, so that and I switch over to cycles once in a while during the process to just make sure that it still looks good, within what I'm trying to do. So we can switch back to Eevee because cycles looks good. The fog looks a lot better, and now it's about continuing to work. So we have these, like, we can touch up our area here with these kind of like stones. So you can see we can kind of like touch up our shoreline with these kind of stones. You can also, if this transition here from these pieces to the water seems a bit simple, then you can always go in and kind of like add some pieces here of like stones, some randomized elements. That's really good. Let me, just for clarity's sake, change the settings closer to what we had before so that you can see better what I'm actually doing. So you see we can just add these kind of like rocks here, and then maybe there's like something peeking out here on the water, and then you have some, you can paint them on here, and you can change them, scale them, duplicate them. You can do all sorts of things. And that's the way how we can kind of populate these areas here. We can of course also combine these with assets like these rocks. So if I export them from Quixel, then we can mix those in with our own stones and create quite a good, interesting result. So you see that they can blend in on first glance. They can definitely blend in. I mean, I'm not saying these look as good as Quixel, but I mean, from a distance, who can tell the difference? And this way you can maybe use Quixel stuff for like the standout hero items that are a bit closer, and then you can kind of continue to have different kinds of rocks further up the shoreline, and then that would create like a very nice kind of blend between things. And of course now you can like copy these guys more and more and have multiple of them and you can have bigger structures that you can first block out in really simple cubes. If I can find it again. Where was my cube? That was the cylinder. So if you have that one, you just create like some very simple designs, and then you can really go to town and paint these up, or let's say sketch these up. And with this one as well, and then you just go through the same kind of techniques I've shown here, in which you can create different kinds of structures, different either if they're solid or if they are more like this, you can create structures that are made out of stone, like this guy here. It can be simple as this, or it can be as simple as like a box here. But I mean, we can do this really quickly without any sculpting, without any further deeper knowledge of, I don't know, texturing or whatever. But we can really quickly sketch these kind of particular kind of items that require a bit of structure, but are not like crazy hard surface kind of precision modeled things. So in that sense, this technique really serves well for sketching these honestly quite detailed looking structures here, like I've shown you. Okay, so now I'd like to actually take a look at the final scene that I built, and show you kind of what I did there. So here we are now in the big final scene that I built. So just to go through these pieces bit by bit so you understand what I did here, and that it's not some magic, but exactly the kind of things I showed you before. So let me hide everything that is added with Quixel. So you can see that I added some background stuff, some additional rocks, and also some roots and branches and that kind of stuff, but you'll see in a bit. But for now, let's focus on what we built with the techniques that I've showed you before. So we have the docks that are done exactly the same way I just showed you. So I just made a few of them. You can see they are just basically duplicated. It's the same thing again and again. So I duplicated it here and then pushed it over here, and then duplicated it here, duplicate here to turn it on its side to have a bit of a structure in the back, and then I kind of had like a way that goes down here. Let me also hide some of the other things I brought in, and then I kind of made like another structure here in the back based on one of the shots I made, which is kind of like this. So you have like a nice silhouette sticking out from the mountain, and it's all the same pieces here that is just duplicated, duplicated, duplicated. You can play around with that in the scene file. And then I have, for example, this here is done the same way. If I press tab, you can see it's a bunch of overlapping tubes here done with the curve tool, and then applied a remesh voxel modifier with a bit of a higher setting, and so it looks really fractured and weird. And if I kind of hide it in here, then it kind of looks like a bit of like old wood piled up here, and kind of like maybe a way to stop the waves from coming higher. And I also have I also did a ladder, and I did that the same way. If I press tab, you see that it's just a bunch of tubes painted quickly on a plane with the curve tool, and then the remesh modifier applied, giving it this kind of look. And you just need to play around with the voxel size, and then you will get there. All these little rocks here is all the curve tool with the custom profile added, and you see there's just a lot of it. And there's here and there, and those are mixed in with the rocks from kit bashing. So here I did like a house, and you can see how crude it looks for the most part. If I hit tab, you can see there's there's a big mess going on there. But because it was a background item, I didn't really care too much about the crazy detail look about it. You see, it almost looks like one of those really bad scanned models. But if it's in the background in the fog, you won't notice. These are the big kind of towers that I wanted. Again, if you look closely, they're done exactly the same way as before. They even have a big hole up here, which I forgot to close. But for these guys, it's more important the silhouette with these kind of roofs, and that they kind of stand out against the mountain range. I duplicated this one again, same as the one down here. And then I just made a little bit of a mashup between these guys. It's not even properly set down here, but it's more about the overall silhouette and shape that these guys give me. And I mean, it doesn't even really make much sense that you just go in here and then you're kind of stuck or whatever. But it doesn't really matter. It's about the silhouette. And then I also made some bigger mountain shapes with the same technique as the rocks here. It's just that I scaled it up and made bigger tubes, and then you can see how I just scribbled on top of it, and then I just let it remesh. So you can generate these really quickly, and then you scale up the material really quickly, and then you have at least rough mountain rocks, whatever. It doesn't hold up, of course, when you go really close, but for what it needs to be, it's perfectly adequate. So this is kind of how I built this little fishing village or whatever it is, right? We have the plane for the water, which of course is just a lot bigger, so I can have a really wide view in the other direction if I need to. And here I have my terrain plane, and you see there's a little bit of a displacement going on, but you can explore that. It's nothing new. I've used this many times before. If you go in the settings, you see that there's just a distorted noise applied in the displacement modifier, which allows me to get this shape and then play around with the strength a bit to get exactly the kind of overlap I want. And then these guys are basically the same kind of stilts that I used for the dock. I just made them a bit bigger, and I kind of put them out here in the water and duplicated them. And what do we have here? I made a little boat. So it's really a very simple kind of shape. I just made the outside of a boat. Let me see if it's still there. Yeah, this is if I turn everything off, you can kind of see that I made a very simple polygon base of a boat. You see, this is what I made. took the top off, applied a subdivision to make it round, gave it a bit of thickness, and remeshed it so it becomes really broken down. And then I took this as kind of like the guideline to paint all these curves on the outside. You can see how it looks like. So it became this old looking broken kind of boat, applied with the same texture as the dock itself. So that, I thought it was like a little bit of like a little bit of an extra. Other parts that are in here is of course like a character, which I kind of modified from a character I bought. This is a knight character from Pablo Dominguez, which I turned rather into a old character, kind of like an homage to Mobius, one of his characters, walking around. It's this very distinct kind of hat shape, which I recommend you all checking out. It's a frequent character in his comics. Just to have kind of like a more distinct character running around here. Another thing here is that I made a copy of the terrain and then applied the scatter function. So I've shown it before. I've used the scatter add-on for quite a while and just released the latest version 3. You get like a little bit of a interface here, scatter interface, which lets you very quickly choose from a variety of different biomes, meaning like environments for the kind of grass you're looking for, like different kinds of patterns, different like flowers, many different kinds that you can apply here. And then just with a click of a button, you can scatter these around, and then you have quite a lot of controls to, mainly here in the particle properties, to change the number of different grass types. So we have like a clump pattern, small, wild, and they all have their own numbers, and this is where you influence how many of those you really want to have. And it's really easy, and I highly recommend you checking it out, because it can very quickly help you to like add these kind of really randomized pieces of grass. And I kind of wanted to have little bits and pieces here a bit further up the shoreline. There's many other plugins out there, but this is kind of the one I've used the most. And now that we've kind of talked about all these different pieces here that we've these kind of, except for the scatter, we kind of built all ourselves. I actually added some pieces that I had myself built for a different project, and it's always good to kind of revisit and reuse some of those. So I had these wave breakers here, these tetrapods or whatever they're called, kind of for a different project, and I thought, why not throw them in here? They kind of create a bit of an otherworldly element, because they don't really fit into this structure, which is more like old school, like really old, Viking village almost kind of thing. And these are like more modern elements, and they create nevertheless a nice kind of contrast of elements of like, older civilization kind of thing. And they're also kind of overgrown and sunken into the shoreline, so maybe they have been there for a very, very long time. Anyways, just like a little touch, and just to kind of bring in a little bit of personality of what I like to do. That is totally up to you, and you can play around with these elements, because these are all, except for the character, they are all in the file anyway for you to explore and study. And of course a scatter. if we look at what Quixel adds to it, you can see that because I'm always getting asked like, is it okay to kitbash the entire scene? And I'd honestly wouldn't recommend that. Of course, kitbash parts are very important to speed up your workflow and can really be lifesavers in a lot of instances. But to rely 100% on them and to base your designs on them and not be able to do anything without them is very dangerous. So if we see what it adds to it, it adds kind of like supporting elements. Of course, I could just build like the mountain range the same way that I've built the other pieces here, but I just need like a backdrop, and I could either do like add a photo backplate, or I could bash in these kitbash parts. So in terms of what I used for this, you can see that I added some of these like dead trees, dead branches to kind of give a bit of a contrast to the overall elements that we have here in terms of the water, the wood, the stones, because I thought it would add quite a nice touch to the desolate feeling of this area. So here we also have some rocks that I have added multiple times. It's always the same rock, like rotated, the same kind of piece here and here. This is the same as this one. So I'll just repeat them, and this is the same as this one. A couple of times, rotate them, scale them within reason so that it doesn't call too much attention to itself, because they're all really just supporting elements. Now, in terms of using these, of course, after a while, you will realize that you continue to use the same kind of assets, and you continue to encounter these assets that other people use. So what I'd recommend is that you do not always use the stock version of these elements, but rather kind of modify them a little bit to make them fit better to what you're trying to do. So you can kind of see that for this one, I integrated the rock that I painted or sketched myself with these tubes, and kind of overlapped that with an asset from Quixel. And I also kind of, what I do is usually have the proportional editing on, and then you can kind of massage and move these pieces around to really fit your purpose. And I usually make it dependent on the kind of camera angle. So if I'm in the camera and I feel like, okay, this rock is too high or it's too low, then I would make my adjustments based on that. And this rock is actually just this piece turned on its side like this, as you can see with this very distinct kind of boulder here, and then stretched vertically again with a proportional editing where I'm pulling out this piece more than the rest. So kind of like if I'm going back here, then it kind of becomes the usual piece, but if I stretch it, then it can actually become a pointy mountain range. And of course, the textures will stretch, but if it's in the background, if it's in the mist, nobody can really tell what it is and where it falls apart. So this is kind of a rundown of all these elements that I put into this scene. And if I want to render them out, of course, as usual, I would go through the same process that I do all the time, which is that I will render out a final based on my different camera settings. So I have all the cameras included here as well, and it's the same process I've shown many times. So if you go through these, you can see different lenses, different points of view, just to show that these kind of scenes can be shown in many different ways through different cameras. So if we're looking at this one, and I would usually render out a normal pass and like a beauty pass with Eevee or cycles, I have the mist pass enabled in the passes, and in the world settings I can now, with this new mist pass, exactly influence where it begins, where it ends, to get a nice distribution of black and white values to help me later on separate the elements in Photoshop better. Just to give you a quick idea of what that looks like and how you can check this, for all the guys who've already seen this, please bear with me. So we want to turn on Eevee, and it will take a second for all the textures to load in the first time you do it. So we need to wait a short second. I also added like a transparent pane with a fish net texture on it. I have the texture also included for you to use. And you can play around with that. It's a very cheap way to add a fishnet there that doesn't really impact the performance at all. And now we just need to wait 20 minutes for the scene to load. No, not really. But depending on whether your textures are on an external drive or whether the textures are on a SSD, this might or might not take a while for all the elements to load. It seems like it can't find a texture here, which is fine. That is not necessary right now. I want to show you the depth pass. So once you're in Eevee, you can click on this little arrow here and go to render pass, mist, and now with this here you can influence the gradient of black to white, so you get the ideal distribution of a very light value in the back to a very dark value in the front. And that is that. So we go back to combined, and you also need kind of like an ID pass, the usual. Click on here, flat, random, get rid of the outline, get rid of the overlays, and just say view, viewport render image. And you need these for all of them because there's quite a few elements that you otherwise would have to mask out, and that will get really annoying really quickly. So we have the scene here, we have everything. You probably want to have a denoising node as well. So if we go into the compositor, we say use nodes. And of course for that you need to be in cycles because there's no denoising in Eevee. There's also a new feature here in 2.9, I think. First of all, turn on the adaptive sampling. It will go quite a bit faster, the rendering. For denoising, you can choose a viewport or other denoising. If you have an RTX NVIDIA card, you can choose the optics denoising, which I would recommend is the best one. You can also choose now viewport denoising. For CPU based, it's only the open image denoise. You can choose that like that. You do not necessarily need to do it through the compositor, but in case you're maybe using an old version of Blender, you can, and you don't have this option available, then you can go through the compositor, and you need to turn on the denoising data in the passes. That is only in cycles, by the way. And now you have all these additional inputs here. You say add a new node, denoise, image, we want the noisy image in here, we want the denoising normal here, denoising albedo here. And now we have basically a process that will be added at the end of the render process and will spit out an additional composite that will allow us to get a denoised image that will, especially with the volumes, give us a better image faster. So that is the scene for this month. I hope this was really useful. I think this technique is really can be very, very fun for everybody trying to create these kind of images, and also hopefully a starting block for creating all sorts of crazy, more realistic looking, natural looking kind of pieces of architecture, of, I don't know, boats or whatever else you can think of, because I think this has many applications for all sorts of buildings that are not completely clean. And basically it kind of is a way to bring a bit more of a fun way of working, artistic way of working in 3D without having the typical like 3D look to it. So now we'll render out a lot of different kinds of frames, look at the exercise that we can do, and then we'll be moving on to Photoshop. For the third exercise, now it's time to integrate your sketches, your 3D sketched environment with other parts. Either you build it yourself, you have a kitbash library, older pieces of geometry that you have made for other projects and that could be repurposed for this. Also maybe finalize your character, refine and finalize the textures, lighting, mood, everything that you need in order to find the right balance to then move on, confidently move on into Photoshop. As the last step, let's have a look at Photoshop and just talking a little bit about the last bits that I did to touch up these images. These are still ungraded, so while most of the mood and everything is there and the value distribution is quite okay, I still went through an extra step to bring these into another application to play around with the color grade a little bit. You can use whatever you want. You can use Photoshop, Lightroom, Resolve, whatever you feel like, but it's not really the important part here. I want to show you a few images, not necessarily all of them, but just a few to highlight a few certain things that I did to touch these images up a little bit. They obviously didn't need that much, but this last step can always be very, very useful to push the image a lot more. So you can see this is what I got out of Blender. And it lacks a certain value range, which is okay, because we can push these images quite a bit. So in order to get them closer to the reference that I have collected, and that of course I have up on my other screen, which is something you should do as well at any stage of this image making process, so that you always have in mind, that you always have the goal in mind. Anyways, let's look at the image like that, which is fairly flat, and it feels almost a bit like a log profile on a video camera, meaning that it's kind of like a fairly general distribution of values, a bit flat, but we can push those. So I just made a levels adjustment. You can also use curves or other things in order to see the histogram and see that my value distribution is in this area. So what I did is actually just move the sliders, predominantly the left, the one for the dark values, the one for the white values, and bring it closer to where these values actually start. So you can see that this is like how it was before, and if I move it here, you can see that I'm getting a more natural value distribution here. And I can also move this to make it brighter or darker. So I kind of settled on this, but of course, how you're going to do that will very much depend on your reference and the kind of mood you're going for. You can see before and after. I also have my Z depth pass that I rendered out, and I set it to 20% fill, and I also set it to soft light, so you can see exactly what that does now. So it gives me just a bit more separation of the elements so that it's more readable, that it's clearer up in my little navigator window. As a next step, I didn't quite like how sharp the water was, just really close to camera. So I just did the following. You can see that it's a bit blurry. Very quickly, I just selected this, copy paste, and then just set blur, motion blur, and set it to some value that looked natural. Said OK, and then I actually got, with a soft round brush, made the transition a bit less harsh, so that it's kind of faking a little bit of movement in the water and a bit of a natural camera blur. So here's exactly what I did here. And then I actually brought this texture in here, which is a texture from the reference that I showed you in the beginning, which is kind of like a damaged piece of wood. And of course I have to kind of clean up the silhouette here. I brought this in and then adjusted the values, making a black and white overlay with a saturation layer set to -100 in saturation, so I can turn it on and off. And I overlaid it and adjusted the values first, and then turning this off, I adjusted the colors so it kind of matches the overall mood of the image. And then, of course, in the layer below, I kind of wanted to cut into the silhouette of the original 3D mesh that was there to make it look more natural. And also, if you can see, turning it on and off, I also changed the silhouette of all these pieces here and these as well, so they look a bit more natural and a bit closer to what I had in the reference. And that's pretty much all I did for this one. Now I did some other things for other images. So if you take a look at this one, there's a few more elements in here. So you'll see that some images require more of a touch-up and some images will require less. Let's have a look what I did here. So the same, I did a very drastic level adjustment. The background with a Z depth pass. I added an overlay of, like you can see here, I added an overlay of rocks in the bottom here, and then it also looks like you can see a bit into the more shallow area of the water, and it gives it also a bit of a brownish tone that kind of matches the muddy bits here on the ground. Here I added a little bit of just fog, you can see here in the background. I kind of didn't like these sharp areas here, so I wanted my character to stand out more. So I blurred out the background elements so he stands out. Put a little cutout raven here. That one was from a photo pack, masked photo pack. I keep on mentioning these a lot, from photobash.org, because these masked photo packs are really useful. And you'll see here again, I'll also put them in the background. Here I painted over a little bit to make the transition between the water and the soil a bit more natural. And I do that usually using the stamp tool, the clone stamp tool. So I kind of paint with that, hold Alt, and then you can select the area to paint from, and then I paint on top. So I don't actually use actual paint, but I kind of paint with the existing pixels and values, and that allows me just to later in the grading process not have any kind of flare-ups that the paint would give me, the straight up paint strokes. Here I added some pieces of a rock photo just to get rid of these hard edges that some of these polygons have given me. So just to get rid of that and make it look a bit more natural, since these rocks are quite close up. Here I overlaid a little photo of a tree stump that I found. So that's another way to do it, instead of using the lasso tool and cutting around there, like I did here. You can find a bit of variety here in having some pointy, some smooth, just like you have in the reference. And here I have overlaid a photo of these stilts, and because you can see here that we've got some streaky bits from the texturing process where it just didn't work very well. But that is okay, because we can quickly overlay a photo of a wooden beam that we had from our reference, and then also taking note of these little bits, barnacles or whatever it is, taking note of these, and especially taking note of the silhouette it creates. I added these kind of bits onto some of the other stilts. It's really only necessary to add these in one or two places where you maybe want the viewer to pay more attention to, so it has more detail, and then you can kind of echo this silhouette shape into other areas, and kind of your brain will kind of fill in the details themselves. Now it depends on what kind of image you're creating. If it's just a concept image, a sketch, a final illustration, you might or might not want to add these to add the proper full photographic reference and images into these. So that really depends. And of course, your art director will tell you if he wants to see more of that. Now turning this on and off, you can see it just like adding little bits of imperfections that I wouldn't be able to get through the 3D modeling process, or that would just take way too much time and take too much geometry to realize. So I'll add these into my Paintover. And of course, with 12 images, you have to go through this process quite a number of times. So here's the last bit, the last image I just wanted to show you, showing kind of like a similar thing, but nonetheless, it's the same kind of process that you have to go through multiple times. So you see where I changed the silhouette of these a little bit. What does this layer do? Okay, added a little bit of blooming here in the background next to the mountain. Some crows and ravens again. And now I had this very polygonal looking rock in front of here. So of course I can go in and kind of like paint out the edges if I want to have this guy here. Or what I also can, for the last exercise, of course, bring all your passes and images and renders out of Blender into the 2D application of your choice, whatever it is, Photoshop, Affinity, you name it. Add the last couple of details and bring the mood and everything in alignment with what you set out to do in the beginning with your reference. And then as a final step, you can, if you want to, grade and finalize your image in a color grading application, or just simply stay in Photoshop and add whatever final color adjustments you want, or you can also bring it into Lightroom, DaVinci Resolve, or whatever strikes your fancy.